So thank you again to our partners, to Ms. Valerie, to all of the folks who've been lifted up in partnership with us for this. You all really made this a success, and it is really, truly an honor to be here with you all tonight. So I am going to walk through a presentation. I want to also acknowledge that everyone here will receive a copy of this presentation, so as long as you have registered and we have an email on file for you, you will receive it. But feel free to take as many pictures as you'd like. I know, we have two screens here, but if you can't see, just know that you will get a copy of the presentation. I'd also like to say that tonight's conversation is a non-partisan conversation, right? We're not here to pick sides, to necessarily demonize one side over the other, but we are here to tell the truth. Right, and if we just so happen to say Republican or say Democrat, it's in an effort to make sure that we're accurately speaking on what has happened in our state. So we're going to go ahead and get started. All right. So again, I want to thank our partners for your partnership and for allowing us to be here tonight. This would not be possible without you. I'd also like to thank the Lincolnville Museum Cultural Center. Before we went and started today, we had an opportunity to go and take a tour of the facility, and not only did we have a tour by the director, but she put us in her vehicle and drove us around St. Augustine. So that was phenomenal. And so if you haven't had a chance to visit, we highly encourage you to do so. Both the Lincolnville Museum as well as the Accord Civil Rights Museum and the Accord Freedom Trail. Organizations that are really on the front line working to preserve the history, right? We know that there are those who want to erase our history. They want to erase the stories and the contributions of so many that have come before us. And I say thank you so much to the Accord Civil Rights Museum, and thank you to the Lincolnville Museum for the work that you're doing to preserve our history and tell the stories that those don't want to be told. So I thank you so much. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Equal Ground is a Black-led voting rights organization. Jasmine Bernie Clark, who you've heard from tonight, had the vision 6 years ago to start an organization that was wholly committed to representing the interest of our community, wholly committed to ensuring that we bring more people to the table of policy making and decision-making power, and to increase the capacity of organizations and communities that look like us to be engaged in this fight. And so we do this work through voter education and preparedness. There's been a shifting landscape here in Florida with respect to the voting laws and the rules. And so we make sure that we keep our community engaged around that. We undertake several voter education initiatives, such as tonight, where we come and we talk about things that help educate our community and make them more aware of what is happening. We also engage in leadership training, right? Because we know that we need to be building a bench of people who are committed to doing this work, right? I might be young, but I won't be here forever, right? And so we need to identify people who are going to pick up and carry the mantle forward. And then we also engage in strategic planning as well, because we know we just can't think about this moment, right? We have to think down the road for how we're going to liberate our communities and build power to get the results that we need in our communities. So I'd like to introduce you to some folks from the team. You've met 3 out of the 5. We're a small team, but myself, Executive Director Jasmine Bernie Clark, who you've heard from, is the founder of the organization. Pastor Marcus McCoy Jr., who is our coalitions director, statewide coalitions director. Brother Simon Adams, he is the South Florida field manager. So he represents Central Florida all the way down to South Florida. And then Jackie, who you've heard from tonight, is our North Florida field manager representing Central Florida up to North Florida, up into the Panhandle. All right, so before I begin, I know we all came here to hear an update about legislative session. But I would be remiss if I didn't start this conversation with talking about a monumental decision that was handed down by the Florida Supreme Court last month. And that is the decision to uphold the congressional maps that were approved by the governor in 2022. As you all may have followed this story, Back in 2022, Florida had to redraw our boundaries as a result of the census. Every state undertakes the reapportionment process. But unfortunately, the governor wanted to insert himself in the process, and despite it being the legislature's job to draw the boundaries and the maps, the governor submitted his own map. And in his map, he suggested that we eliminate 2 of Florida's 4 guaranteed Black congressional seats in our congressional delegation. In addition to that, he submitted a map that would further entrench power in the hands of the Republican Party here in this state. Well, there's 2 problems with that. First and foremost, there's a problem because as a Black-led voting rights organization, we disagree with any attempt to take away representation for our community. But secondly, and more importantly, Florida has what's known as fair district amendments. These are rules, these are guidelines that essentially tell our legislature how they should be drawing the maps. These were approved by an overwhelming bipartisan number of Florida voters in 2010. Over 65% of Florida voters agreed to have fair district amendments on our books. And yet, despite those amendments being on the book, our legislature ignored them and ultimately sided with the governor by passing a map that dismantled Black representation and gave a 20-8 advantage in our congressional delegation to Republicans. Now, this case went all the way to the Florida Supreme Court. Our organization joined with Black Voters Matter, a representative of their organization is here tonight. Thank you, Jamil. The League of Women Voters, who I know the League is here, thank you. Florida Rising. And we sued the state of Florida because we felt that this was a violation of the Constitution. Well, the case went all the way to the Florida Supreme Court. The Florida Supreme Court just recently ruled in favor of the governor. So in 2022, in 2024, and it looks like we're headed to another election in 2026, where we will be operating under what we believe to be unconstitutional maps that further take away your political power. And that's a shame. And we wanted to make sure that you all are aware of that, mainly because you know that there are conversations happening right now to go even further. But before I go there, I want to just highlight 2 lines from the dissenting opinion that I thought stuck out and it was worth sharing with you. So this was a 5-1 ruling. There was one justice who recused himself because his wife is a legislator. And in this dissent, Justice LaVarga had 2 lines that stuck out. The first said, the enacted plan violates the non-diminishment clause of the Florida Constitution because it not just diminished, but it eliminated benchmark CD5, a historically performing benchmark district for Black voters. And the next quote said, although the majority agrees, the enacted plan diminishes the ability of Black voters to elect representatives of their choice. It ultimately concludes that no relief is warranted, therefore I dissent. Now this is a Florida Supreme Court justice acknowledging and admitting that our state has abused the voting power and the voting rights of its people. And also admitting that there's nothing that they will do about it. That is what the state of affairs has come to here in this state. That we can openly and brazenly trample on the voting rights of people and yet feel as if no relief is warranted. And so the reason we want to lift this up and make this something that we start off with in this important conversation, because we see that there are real attempts to go even further. Now, despite the governor getting his preferred map in 2022, despite a lawsuit where the maps were upheld, now there are attempts to go even further. You see in states like Texas, where they have redrawn their political boundaries to give Donald Trump an opportunity to hold on to power in the 2026 midterm. Florida is right behind. Our governor has already indicated that he wants to do a mid-decade redistricting effort. The Speaker of the House has went as far as to already start the process of selecting a joint committee to start a mid-decade redistricting effort. And so next month, in September, the Speaker of the House will announce a committee that will form to deal only with congressional redistricting. And, just on a side note on that, that was very telling, right? It kind of showed their motives that he even said, we don't even care about state legislative boundaries, right? Our rationale is only for Congress. And we know that because they want to maintain power. They're afraid to face the voters. They don't want to be accountable to the policies that they've passed, but they want to rig the deck and stack the system in an effort to maintain and hold on to power. But we're fighting back, as you can imagine. We don't take these things sitting down. So we have organized an opportunity for you to contact your legislators directly. And so on your forms, on the many handouts that you may have received, you see a QR code. On that QR code, there will be a link for you to take action and reach out to your legislators. And I want to encourage you to do that. It's very simple. I mean, honestly, it takes no more than 30 seconds. What you'll do is you'll click on that link. There's going to be some information that we ask from you, your name, your address, your zip code, your email, and your phone number. Once you do that, there's a pre-filled email that we already have drafted. If you don't like the email that we have, you can clear it out and write your own. But if you trust the messaging that we have in our email, you hit send, and it automatically goes to your state legislator to tell them to hold off on any attempt to redraw our political boundaries in an effort for it to be a partisan advantage. So does that make sense to y'all? Can I count on y'all to take action? All right. Because we're going to need y'all in this fight. I'm telling you, this is something that is super, super serious. I don't want to belabor this point because I know we're here to talk about session. But just imagine for a moment, 2028 is on the horizon. And we have a deranged person that doesn't believe in democracy and refuses to leave the White House. Ordinarily, you would turn to Congress to hold the executive branch accountable. But what happens when the deck is stacked and everybody in Congress is in alignment with the rogue administration? So this is far greater than just a few seats. This is about the very ideal of America, the very belief that we live in a democracy. Because if you look around, you probably question that every single day with the things that we're seeing. So we need everybody engaged and leaning in on this fight, because this is truly, truly the fight of our lifetime, and us standing up and making sure that we fight back against that. And the last thing I'll say on this issue, there are going to be people that try to gaslight you and say, well, Democrats have been rigging maps in states like California and Illinois and New York. Well, this is what you tell those people. You tell those people, well, states like Florida, we have the fair district amendments. And so we have already told our legislators that we don't want that to happen in our state. And so that's a very important piece, because Texas, although it was wrong for them to rig the map, they don't have fair district amendments, right? They don't have rules that specifically forbid their legislators from rigging the maps. Our fair district amendments literally say do not draw districts with respect to partisanship. That's a very important piece that I need y'all to understand. And as you leave this place, take that with you. All right, so let's go ahead and hop into legislative session. So what is legislative session? Legislative session is supposed to be a 60-day period of time in which our legislators go to our state capital, which is Tallahassee, to conduct the affairs of our state. Now, I said supposed to because, as has been stated prior, our legislature went 45 days into overtime. And this year, our legislative session was 105 days. Session was supposed to go from March 3rd through May 2nd, but it didn't end until June, somewhere in there in June. But what you see during session is the creation and the passage of new laws, the repeal of old laws, but most importantly, the passage of a state budget. If legislators go to Tallahassee and pass 0 bills, but pass a state budget, constitutionally, they've done their job. And so this year, despite Republicans holding the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion, they could not come to the same agreement to pass a budget on time. So who are some of the key players in this process? First and foremost, you have us, right? Without you paying taxes, without you existing, there would be no need for a state government. You are the lifeline and the purpose of us needing state government. You have your advocacy groups, the Equal Grounds of the world, the NAACPs of the world, the Indivisibles of the world, right? Organizations that are generally advocating for the best interest of all of the people in the state. Then you have your lobbyists. They typically work to ensure the interest of their client, right? They can care less about what anybody else has going on. All they care about is, does their client get from the process what their client needs? Then you have staff. Every member of the legislature has multiple staff persons. These are people that should be available to assist you and meet with you and walk you through the needs of the legislative process. You also have staff that work in Tallahassee exclusively. People that help draft the bills, people that keep the building open, right? There's a lot of people that go into this operation. You have our legislature. Presently, Florida has a Republican legislature. I'll get into a little bit more on that in a second. And then you have our governor, Ron DeSantis, who signs all legislation into law. And so he's a major factor in this process, because oftentimes if they send him something that he doesn't agree with, then he won't sign it. So there's oftentimes a consultation between the legislature and the governor's office to determine what type of policies we see impacted. But he's in his final year, as we'll be electing a new governor in 2026.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. All right, so how do we engage in this process? First and foremost, Equal Ground makes the commitment to be in Tallahassee every week of legislative session. This is deeply important to us, because if we are to represent you all and speak up for the issues that you care about, we have to be present. We have to, be on a first-name basis with these legislators. We got to be able to talk to them, engage with them, talk about the issues. We offer a weekly newsletter. I know some of you are subscribed to our newsletter. It goes out to over 13,000 people every day. Every week of legislative session, the first Monday of the week at 11 a.m., we send out a newsletter talking about the updates from week to week around session. When it's not legislative session, we send this out on the first Monday of every month. So we don't send it every week. We send it on the first Monday of every month. Then we provide opportunities for you to take action. So like how I told you, I want you to reach out to your legislators about redistricting. We do that throughout session, around various bills. We ask people to come to Tallahassee to speak on the record, to go to committee and meet with legislators. We have our Day at the Capitol, which is our signature advocacy day, where we have people from all over the state of Florida come to Tallahassee to meet with their legislators, to engage and to talk about the issues that are important to our community. And we're very fortunate that this year we had just shy of 300 people registered to join us in Tallahassee. And that's something that we're very proud of, because we've been able to grow that from just a dozen people traveling with us on the first trip to now, like I said, almost 300 people making that trip. Thank you. Making that trip for us in Tallahassee. We engage in coalition building, right? Because we know that we can't do this work alone. It takes all of us. There's no saying, many hands lifted makes the load lighter. We truly believe that, right? We need to work together. I know we may not always agree, but we have to find that common ground and forge ahead on the things that we do agree on, because there's so much work that has to be done. And then lastly, we engage in truth-telling. We know that there are people in Tallahassee who would have you believe that everything that happens in Tallahassee, everybody agrees with, right? We know that is the furthest thing from the truth. But unless we're engaging in the media, unless we're speaking up, sharing our stories, talking about the impact, right, they get to shape the narrative. And we deeply believe that that should not be the case. So we invite you to join us in Tallahassee. We've tentatively set the date for our 2026 Day at the Capitol. It will be February 3rd and 4th. Again, February 3rd and 4th, 2026. On your papers, there's a QR code on the left side. If you scan that QR code, there's a pre-registration link. So I invite you to go ahead and pre-register to get on the list. As we develop and roll out more details, you'll be among the first to know. So please, please, please join us in Tallahassee February 3rd through 4th. Now, I got a special surprise for y'all, St. Johns County, because you all are in a very, very unique position. I have not been able to say this to any other county that I've gone to. And what that is the inaugural St. Johns County Day of the Capitol will be February 5th. So just imagine how many retirees I have in the room. This is my quick show of hands. All right, leave those hands up. Okay, actually, put those hands down. How many people do I have who are still working? They're still working. Okay, they're still working. Okay, that's fine. Leave those hands up. If you have PTO, leave your hand up. All right? Now, retirees, put your hands back up. All right, now that looks like about 95% of you who either is free and you're retired, or you have PTO to make this trip. And so you all are in a very unique spot to where you can come to Tallahassee February 3rd and 4th and stick around on February 5th for the inaugural St. Johns County Day at the Capitol. And so we invite you. We wanted to make sure that you all knew about this. This is the first time your county's doing this. Several other counties do it. And essentially what it is a day where your elected leaders come to the Capitol and they talk about ways that the state legislature can support your county, right? In terms of appropriations, bills, and different things like that. And they really count on local people coming up to be a part of that so they can really sell the county and the impact and the need. So we encourage you to really consider joining us February 3rd, 4th, and 5th for Equal Ground Day at the Capitol and St. Johns County Day at the Capitol. All right, so now I want to talk about the legislature. So you heard me say earlier, Florida has a supermajority legislature. So what exactly does that mean, okay? When you hear me say a supermajority legislature, what that means is that at least 60% of the people in each chamber belong to one political party. And so as you can see on this graphic here, we have 120 seats in the Florida House of Representatives. Out of those 120 seats, 87 of them are occupied by Republicans. 87 out of 120. 32 of those seats are occupied by Democrats, and there's one vacancy. And so this is important that we level set with this, is because when you hear us go on throughout the presentation and talk about all these bills, you need to understand who is in the driver's seat, right? Who's holding the policy discussion? Who's controlling what bills get heard and what bills don't get heard, right? And as you can see from this graphic, Democrats are outnumbered more than 2 to 1. And this, again, tying back into redistricting, is because of gerrymandered maps. You know in this state that Republicans don't outnumber Democrats in voter registration 2 to 1. So why should they have 2 to 1 when it comes to the representation in our House? And that's because of gerrymandered maps. And the result of gerrymandered maps, the result of them rigging the system is policies that don't serve us, right? It robs us of the opportunity to engage in earnest around policy, right? I worked in Capitol Hill for 4 years, and I just want to say that also. Jackie said I served in the 113th and 114th Congress. I am not a former member of Congress. I just want to, say that for everyone. I worked in the 113th and 114th Congress. I was in Tallahassee last night. Someone came up and said, "Congressman Robinson, it's so good to see you." And I said, I got to make sure I give that disclaimer moving forward. But that is the impact of rigged maps right there, as you can see in that illustration. And then in the Senate, it's no better. We have 40 seats in the Senate. 27 of them are held by Republicans. 10 of them are held by Democrats. There's one no party affiliation. You all may remember during session, there was a former leader of the Senate caucus who resigned his position as leader and changed his political party. So that left the one MPA. And then there's 2 vacancies. Recently, the governor named Blaise Ngolia as the CFO for the state of Florida. And so that was one vacancy. And then the other vacancy, you may know the name of the late Senator Geraldine Thompson, who served as a longtime public advocate and She passed away earlier this year, which left a vacancy in her seat, but there will be a special election on September 2nd to fill that seat, and 20 of these seats will be up for election in 2026. Here are members of the St. Johns County delegation. These are faces that you all should know, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. These people are elected to represent your interests. I know it may be tough when they don't want to pick up the phone or they don't want to take a meeting with you, but these are the people who represent you here in St. Johns County. I also want to note that we have invited every one of these members to be here tonight. As you can see, none of them showed up, but we are grateful for Representative Angie Nixon, who was not even a member from St. Johns County, making a drive over to the neighboring county to come and share with you all today. And so we thank her for that. But again, these are all of your representatives here in St. Johns County. Here are some of the bills that were passed by members, bills that were introduced by members of the St. Johns County delegation. Like I said, you all are going to get this presentation, so for the sake of time, I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to point out one bill by Senator Lee that I know is of major interest to everyone in the room, and that is the Black History Museum. That was Senate Bill 46. So as you all know, the state of Florida has decided to construct an African American History Museum, and there was a lot of debate over where that museum would land. But as you all, I'm sure, are very proud, St. Johns County has been selected as the home for this museum, and it is going to move forward. It's going to move forward right here in this community. Now, Equal Ground, we didn't take a position on this bill, not because we don't believe in a Black History Museum. As a Black-led voting rights organization, we certainly believe in a Black History Museum. But we took a hands-off approach because there was a lot of fighting on where the museum should be. We have partners in Central Florida that wanted the museum in Eatonville. We have partners in South Florida that wanted the museum in Okalaka. We have partners in the Panhandle that even tried to make the case, despite it being the least desirable place to drive, for a museum. And so we just wanted to take a hands-off approach to let the dust settle and let the process play out, because everybody wanted us to write letters of recommendation, right, for them. So we didn't want to do that. The other reason that we're watching this process with caution is we have serious concerns that a state that has denied the existence of Black history can then in earnest turn around and create a museum for Black history. And so we have to be very vigilant and mindful of how this process plays out. We got to make sure that we hold the line. We got to count on our historians to make sure that they're accurately telling the story and they're not distorting and whitewashing the truth, right? Because we don't want a sanitized version of a museum. We want the full, unvarnished truth of what has happened in this country. I also want to invite you to visit FloridaReportCard.com. Our partners at Progress Florida and Florida Watch put together a report card every year that grades the legislators based on their ability to fight for the issues that the people care about. And so I got a very good suspicion that you might not be surprised when you go in there and see your St. Johns County representatives and their grade. So please visit FloridaReportCard.com to view that when you have a chance. All right, so this year there were almost 2,000 bills that were introduced in the legislature, 1,989 to be specific. Of those 1,989 bills, 269 of them made it to the governor's desk. So as you can see, it's quite difficult to get legislation passed in the Florida legislature. Of those 269, the governor has acted on 91% of those bills. He only vetoed 11, and there's still a few more that are waiting for the governor to sign. But as of today, 91% of the bills that were passed this year have already been signed into law, and many of them have already gone into effect, as July 1st was the start of the new budget year for the state of Florida, as well as the implementation of over 150 new laws. So we encourage you to go out and do your research on what those new laws are. So before we go into the individual bills, I want to sort of talk about how we are viewing this session. You know, this session was really unique. For the first time, we saw infighting between the Republican Party. You know, I mentioned earlier that they hold the governor's mansion, they hold the legislature, they hold the Florida Supreme Court. And typically, when you have alignment in that way, you would think that it would create an opportunity for you to get any and everything done that you want to get done. Well, this year was different. And part of the reason we think it was different is because this was the first legislative session going into it where we knew that our governor's aspirations to be president of the United States were done. If you've been following Florida politics, you know that ever since Ron DeSantis came on the scene in 2018, he had a desire to run for president of the United States. And so every policy, everything that came out of his mouth, every bill was in pursuit of giving him a platform to use on the national stage to sell to the rest of the country on why he should be president. Well, when you lose that, you know, sort of aspiration, and it's clear that you're not going to be the guy, that allows people to break away from you in terms of their allegiance. And the same people that you sort of held power over this potential of you being the president, they going along with your agenda, that breaks. And that showed itself in this session as the governor had many of his priority bills stall out and didn't make it across the finish line. He had various budget requests that he asked for that did not get funded. And so that was really an opportunity for us to take advantage of that dysfunction and have some bills that we really did not like not end up passing. Also, you can't talk about this session without acknowledging the fact that before session even started, we entered into 2 special sessions over the issue of immigration. As you all know, there was a change in leadership at the top of this country in January. And Florida literally tripped over itself to get an alignment around immigration policy. And we had 2 special sessions to attack our immigrant communities, to take away their rights, to take away their ability to exist in this state. And so that's also something that you have to think about when you think about this session. So now I want to walk through some of the bills that we were tracking this year, and I'll start with the state budget. So this year, Florida signed into law a $117.4 billion budget. The state agency that received the most funding was the Health and Human Services, received $17.5 billion. There was also almost a little over $6 billion collectively for education, both at the secondary and post-secondary level. The Florida Department of Transportation received $15.1 billion for transportation issues. The 4 HBCUs in our state, we have 4 HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. They received a historic $161.5 million investment. Now, I paused there because as a graduate of the great Florida A&M University, Mr. Barney, watch out now. As a graduate of the Florida A&M University, while this is celebrated as a milestone for HBCUs, when you look at the fact that we have a $117.5 billion budget, that is literally peanuts, right? That is literally peanuts for what we know that we could do to support our scholars at these institutions. But I also want to say that there was a pay increase for state employees, for law enforcement, and for first responders. But unfortunately, there was not much left for our educators, which my wife is an educator, and I'm happy that she and my son Langston are here with us tonight. So, in addition, to the budget, I just want to say that, the reason that they had this disagreement over the budget was over the idea of wanting to eliminate property taxes. You had one faction that wanted to eliminate property taxes, and they had another faction that wanted to reduce the sales tax. Now, as a consumer, taxpayer, trying to survive in this ever increasingly unaffordable state that we live in, I know that, not paying property taxes may sound attractive to you. But I want to caution folks when they hear of ideas to raise property taxes, because property taxes are the main funding source for our education. Property taxes are also the main funding sources for our municipalities. And so when we talk about cutting property taxes, you're cutting the very lifeline that funds education and essential services at the local level. And so I want folks to be very wary of that. I want folks to understand the impact of that and understand that it will have a disastrous impact if it were to come into fruition. Now, the governor, the legislature said, okay, well, we can't come to an agreement on whether or not we should eliminate property taxes this year. Let's at least fund a study. We're going to put $1 million towards doing a study to really find the dangers and the impact of reducing property taxes. Well, the governor vetoed the study. He literally said, I know what I want. We don't need a study to tell me what I want. We need to reduce property taxes. So that will be a conversation that will be ongoing, but I want you to understand that there will be dangerous implications if we reduce or took away property taxes. And so while there was a lot of posturing to say that they were trying to save you as taxpayers money, ultimately corporations ended up walking away with the most benefit from this year's tax package. We saw over $2.25 billion in tax cuts, most of which went to already billionaires and millionaires. And so we see private corporations benefit with casinos getting a tax break. We see airlines getting a tax break on the fuel tax. Check this one out. NASCAR even got a tax break. And so if you're a NASCAR fan, you don't have to pay sales tax on your NASCAR tickets because of a new tax break that they just put in place. And the reason I'd like to bring that up is because these are the type of political games that our legislators are playing. We know that that tax break for NASCAR was really a signal to a certain type of vote, right? And this is the type of things that they're doing with your tax dollars, right? The next thing I want to talk about is that the business rent tax was eliminated. I know that there's some business owners in the room. This will be about a $900 million reduction for revenue for the state of Florida. Business owners have long sought after to repeal that. We also expanded the back to school sales tax holiday. So now that's 1 month. It used to be 1 week, but now for the entire month of August, there's no sales tax to prepare for back to school. We also have made the sales tax to prepare for disasters permanent. So a few years ago, Florida created the disaster preparedness sales tax holiday, and that is now going to be permanent every year to give you an opportunity to prepare for hurricane season. So batteries, lighters, flashlights, tarps, all the things that you need, you can purchase those during that time and not have to pay tax. And then it wouldn't be Florida if we didn't do something for the gun owners. And so we now have a Second Amendment sales tax holiday. And so if you want to buy a gun, if you want to buy more bullets, you can now purchase those during the Second Amendment sales tax holiday and not have to pay any tax. No, it's not year-round. It's just for a specific period of time. St. Johns County walked away with about a little shy of $500 million in the budget for appropriations. And so you can see where you stack up, you rate within, I think, the top 10 of all of the counties in the state in terms of the money that you walked away with from the appropriations process. And so that money is split up between various projects. As you can see, you have $750,000 went to the Epic Recovery Center for women and substance abuse. You have over $94 million went to the Florida School for the Deaf and Blind. Over $6 million to school readiness and early learning programs. And again, I mentioned the Black History Museum received $1 million to start phase 1 of that project. Here, there were some vetoes in the budget. Fortunately, the Switzerland Vocational and Community Center had $70,000 cut. out of the budget. First Coast Technical College had $92,000 cut out of the budget. And so just wanted to share some of those vetoes. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about the ballot initiative process. Now, Representative Angie Nixon touched on this briefly, but I want to go a little further. So, as you all know, we have a process in the state of Florida that allows us as voters to fill out a petition to get something on the ballot. This is something that we as voters use when our legislators ignore the things that we want. When we said we want returning citizens to have the right to vote, they didn't do it. We put it on the ballot through the citizen-led initiative process, and we got it done. When we said we wanted to increase minimum wage, they wouldn't do it. We put it on the ballot, and we got it done. So in short, they know that the citizen-led initiative process is an opportunity for you to hold power, and they don't like that. They don't want anybody holding power except them. And so there have been real attempts to come after this process and make it a lot harder for us to get things done through the citizen-led initiative process. And so this year, the state of Florida passed a law that we opposed, and this law is now going to require anyone collecting petitions for ballot initiatives to register as a petition collector. Now, if you fail to register as a petition collector and you collect over 25 petitions, you have now committed a felony in the state of Florida. Think about that. If I just had this little section right here, sign a piece of paper, I've committed a felony. I haven't hurt anybody, I haven't stolen any election, I haven't voted for anybody. I just simply said, sign this piece of paper, right? And so we know that this is an attack on your voting rights, this is an attack on your power. And unfortunately, despite all of our efforts to stop it, it still passed. In addition to now requiring you to register as a petition collector, you also the law said that you also must be a U.S. citizen. You also must be a Florida resident. If you're a returning citizen, you cannot collect petitions if you have a felony conviction around certain crimes. And so this was just a terrible bill that really cut into our ability to make a difference. And this is despite Florida already having the most difficult process of any state. And I don't say that, just to be an alarmist, but that is true. In order to get something on the ballot in Florida, you need over 1 million signatures. You need the language approved by the Florida Supreme Court. You have to get an affidavit by the CFO saying that there's no financial risk to Florida voters. And when you get it to the ballot, over 60% of Florida voters have to approve it. So this is already a difficult process. It has the necessary safeguards in place. But they want to make it harder because they don't want you to continue to win on the issues that they have ignored and neglected year after year. Now, there was an attempt to have an injunction on the entire law from going into effect. Unfortunately, the federal judge did not agree that it warranted a complete injunction, and instead has issued a partial injunction. So the parts that have been blocked are mainly around the status of who can collect. So the judge ruled that there's no reason for Florida to block non-citizens from collecting petitions, and there's also no need to block non-Florida residents from collecting petitions. However, most of the rest of the provisions will go into effect. And one of the main ones that's going to really impact this process is in this law, there was also a provision that says supervisors of elections now have 90 days to certify whether or not a petition that was delivered to them is valid. And so if you know anything about the petition process, you know that this will make your job a lot harder because you're working towards a certain goal. So let's say our goal was 1 million verified signatures. Well, if the supervisors of elections now has 90 days to verify, as we get closer to that deadline, I could be, close to my deadline without even knowing the status of where we sit with our petition collection. And so this is another deliberate attempt to make the process harder for everyday folks. Now, the next 3 bills that I want to talk about deal with political interference of the ballot initiative process that was undertaken by our government. So we know in 2024 there were several amendments on the ballot Mainly the ones that got a lot of attention were amendments 3 and 4, dealt with abortion and cannabis. And the governor didn't want either one of these amendments to pass. So he went as far as directing his administration to send a letter to the television stations that were broadcasting favorably for these amendments and said that you must cease and desist. And failure to pull these ads down could result in legal action. And so this year, Senator Carlos Smith filed a bill to say that no governor or person should be able to use their influence to try and stop a broadcaster from pulling down a television ad. The next thing that we also supported but was defeated was a bill that tried to stop what happened again, where we saw the state use our tax dollars, our resources, to try and stop, or excuse me, not stop, but use our tax dollars to put out advertisements and mailers to influence how we felt about these initiatives. Now, this is a political process. Regardless of where you may feel on either of the amendments, our state has no role in using our tax dollars to try and to influence how people feel. And so this bill would have said that, the governor's office cannot create commercials to air on television. They can't create mailers to send to your home in an effort to influence how you feel. But unfortunately, this bill also fell on deaf ears and it did not pass either. And then the last thing that I want to talk about that is tied again to the ballot initiative process is the issue of Hope, Florida. Now, just real quick, by a quick show of hands, who knows about Hope, Florida? All right, I can imagine most of you all would know about Hope, Florida. Well, Hope, Florida was an emerging scandal that was unearthed last year during legislative session. And essentially what happened was there was a medical provider in the state that had overbilled the state of Florida to the tune of $67 million, right? And when this was unearthed and discovered, the state of Florida said, hey, we need all of our money back. You got to pay us our money back. Well, instead of all of that $67 million going to the state of Florida, 10 million of that was diverted to an organization called Hope, Florida. Now, Hope, Florida is an organization, a nonprofit organization that is closely aligned with the governor and his wife. This is literally like their pet project. Hope, Florida is not a political entity. They have never given political contributions. Their stated mission is to help Floridians navigate bureaucracy, to help people who rely on government assistance become more self-sufficient. Nothing in their mission is political. And so when it was discovered that this nonprofit organization had received $10 million of tax dollars, and not only did they receive $10 million of tax dollars, but they took that $10 million and they then gave it for political purposes, a lot of people had questions, including the Republican legislature. And in the House, they convened a hearing to try to get to the bottom of it. Well, what made this Hope, Florida situation a lot more concerning, the best word I'm trying to use, is we found out that the governor's chief of staff was really at the center of all of this drama. So as the chief of staff of the governor, he essentially directed this money to go to the Hope, Florida. But then when Hope, Florida got the $10 million, they gave it to a political action committee that was connected to the governor's chief of staff. So you talk about conflict of interest, right? We're paying this man tax dollars as the chief of staff to the governor. And yet he's working off the hours, might not be off the hours, might be on the clock. But he's working also as the chair of this political action committee. And so this has created a huge scandal. It really torpedoed a lot of the governor's priorities during session because it created a huge issue where you had legislators who profess that they are for upholding the Constitution, but yet they want to be supportive of the governor and put them in a really bad position, because if it was anybody else, especially a Democrat, right, it wouldn't even be a question as to how they would come down with swift precision and the hammer to ensure that that person is held accountable. But because it's the governor, it seems like there's a different set of rules that he gets to play by. And the reason that it's even more complicated is the governor's chief of staff has now gotten a promotion. Florida had to elect a new senator. Well, we had to pick a new senator. Marco Rubio went on to serve in the Trump administration and created a vacancy. The governor then took our old attorney general, Ashley Moody, and he made her Florida's new senator. Well, now that there's a vacancy in the attorney general's office, we need a new attorney general. And guess who the governor picked to be the attorney general for the state of Florida? His chief of staff. And so in matters like this, it would typically be the attorney general that would investigate and get to the bottom of what has happened. Y'all are laughing because you know that the attorney general can't investigate himself.
Exactly.
And he certainly cannot investigate his boss, who has given him job after job, opportunity after opportunity. And so we believe that that was very strategic by the governor to put him in that place to try to squash and stop this investigation. However, this case has been referred to the Leon County Prosecutor's Office. From what I understand, they are investigating this case. And just for a quick laugh, when I did this a few weeks ago, I had a legislator stand up and say, "Don't forget to tell the people that I referred this case to the FBI." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you. That's very great." And then I said, "Well, who controls the FBI?" And then he started scratching his head. You know, because I mean, what good does it do if you're referring it to an FBI that's already corrupt and proven that they're not going to hold people accountable, right?
Right.
So I just wanted to give y'all an update on the whole Florida piece. All right, the next bill I want to talk about is the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Florida Voting Rights Act. This is a pro-democracy bill that seeks to make it easier for you to be able to access the ballot box. We know Florida always passes voter suppression laws. We talked about what they did with the redistricting fight, how they're rigging the maps. And so this bill is named after Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore, and it's Florida's version of the Voting Rights Act. Many of you may know about the Voting Rights Act at the federal level. Well, after 2013, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act at the federal level, and it really doesn't have the same weight or enforcement that it used to have. And so states have started saying, well, what does it look like for us to create our own version of the Voting Rights Act to ensure that we protect our democracy? And so this bill would have done a number of things, such as prevent vote dilution, give minority groups equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice, expand language access. It would have repealed the need to request your vote by mail ballot every election cycle, as we know is now a requirement in the state. It would have also created a centralized database for our returning citizens. Right? We talk about Amendment 4 and how we overwhelmingly voted to give returning citizens the right to vote. But what we don't talk about all the time is what the legislature did after we passed Amendment 4. And that's when we go in and redefine what it means to have a completed sentence. And so now if you're a returning citizen wanting to have your right to vote, you can't have your right to vote until you've paid all of your fines and fees associated with your conviction. Yet, the state has no centralized place where you can go and identify what your fines and fees are. So it creates a problem where you're telling me I have a requirement that I have to satisfy, but you can't give me the tools to satisfy said requirement. So we're very proud to support this bill. It's named after Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore. I know we got some NAACP folks in the house tonight, but if you do not know the name of these two individuals, I encourage you to go home, to research, to understand who they were and what they meant to this state. Yes, we know the name of Dr. King. Yes, we know Malcolm X. Yes, we know Rosa Parks. But these were people who were organizing in the deep South, working to ensure that people had an opportunity to have a say in our civic engagement process. And they paid the ultimate price for it. Both Mr. Moore and his wife were killed on Christmas. On Christmas Day, a bomb went off at their home in Memphis. And they both died as a consequence of the injuries sustained in this bomb, right? And so as a Black-led voting rights organization, it is an honor for us to work on this legislation and push it forward to ensure that we provide more protections in our democracy. This bill was the brainchild of the late Senator Geraldine Thompson. She passed away, unfortunately, and we had to find